You don't have to be the best at the thing that you do. Ideally, you hire people on the team who are even better than you at the core competencies, but people can tell at the end of the day if you know what you're talking about, and being able to really understand what your team is doing, talk to them as concretely as you need to get to resolution on things really does both build respect and just create clarity and create progress. Staying current is so important.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Leaders in Tech, where we're interviewing the business leaders that are in technology, leading technical people to make this world a better place. Today, we have with us George London. George, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
George, for the audience, can you give me your full name? Where do you live and what do you do for a living?
My name is George London. I live in Oakland, California, and I am the Chief Technology Officer of Upwave.
This podcast is brought to you by ISU Corp. Are you having trouble with your software projects? Is there a project that's taking too long or a technology you can't handle? We can help. We are ISU Corp, experts in custom software since 2005. With almost 20 years of experience, we can solve any technical problem from new businesses to satellite software. We've done it all. Let us turn your ideas into reality. Learn more about how we can help by visiting us at www.isucorp.ca. Your solution starts here.
What do you guys do at Upwave?
Upwave's mission is to bring science to the top of the funnel, which, for those not familiar with advertising, means that we measure the effectiveness of upper funnel advertising and brand advertising campaigns. So that's any kind of advertising that's not intended to drive a click or a conversion in the short term. So it's things like car commercials that are not trying to get you to buy a Mercedes today, but instead of trying to make sure the next time you're in the market for a car, you remember the Mercedes exists.
And that's the type of advertising that is the most scary for me as an entrepreneur, because it's very hard to measure its success. So how are you guys doing that? This is fascinating because, when you do digital advertising, digital marketing, it's very easy. There's metrics that you can even throw AI at it and you know clearly your click-through rate and all that. But in traditional advertising, like a car commercial, how do you measure success?
This is a big challenge, and this is the entire reason that Upwave exists. Brand advertising is a tremendous industry. There's roughly $1 trillion a year that's spent on advertising, and of that, roughly $500 billion is spent on brand advertising. But there has been this fascinating dichotomy where, like you said, performance-based advertising, direct response advertising, has clicks and conversions that you can easily observe and measure, whereas that $500 billion of brand advertising historically has largely been decided on the basis of tradition and intuition instead of scientific measurement. So Upwave is trying and succeeding to actually bring scientific measurement into brand advertising. And we do that by recording exposure to brand ads and then surveying people we know have seen ads or people who have not. And that lets us create a scientific exposed control methodology and then look for the incremental difference in attitudes among people who've been exposed versus not exposed. So we can actually see, people who are exposed to this car commercial are 5 percentage points more likely to say they would consider buying a Mercedes. We can look at all the pre-existing differences between the exposed and control to control for the targeting effects of advertising and give people a true incremental performance to tell them exactly a percent of people were impacted by the ad, tell them exactly the whole number of people, tell them, you got 1 million new people to consider buying a Mercedes on the basis of this car commercial, which they can then connect to the customer lifetime value that they assign to people who would consider Mercedes and actually put real hard dollar values on the impact of that brand advertising.
That's amazing. And how long has the company been in business?
We were founded in 2012 through Y Combinator, but we actually shifted our line of business in 2016, I guess more 2016, 2017, which is around when I joined the company. We were originally a market research platform that was focused on instant insights surveys. So sort of finding audiences to take surveys. But then we realized that a much more valuable application of that technology was using it to measure the effectiveness of brand advertising. And so we shifted gears and went fully into that field and have been just pursuing that since about 2017.
That's amazing. So you are no longer a startup, or you still consider a startup?
We still think of ourselves as a startup. We're still growing fast. We're still a lean and scrappy team. And we're still shooting for the moon and hoping we're going to get there. But after a number of years, it takes consistent energy to keep pushing and pushing until you get to where you're going.
I know it's hard, right? And people don't like, when people think about startups, they think about, a 3-year-old company, 2-year-old company, a 6-month-old company, not a 12-year-old company, right? But it's true, right? You're still in startup mode when you're achieving your goals and trying to grow faster, and you may need to pivot again to achieve your goals, right?
People in Silicon Valley often talk about the 10-year overnight success story, which is actually a pretty common pattern, that it takes quite a long time until you really hit the exponential part of the exponential growth curve. But then when you get there, things can grow really fast. And I've been at this for 9 years personally, so I'm really hoping for that 10-year overnight success story.
So you've been there for most of the time. How do you get into that business? How do you get associated with the company?
I had a pretty indirect career path. I majored in philosophy at Yale. I was not intending to go into computer science. I did not major in computer science, although I have been playing with computers and doing a little programming on the side since I was a kid. But my first job after college was at a hedge fund called Bridgewater Associates, doing investment research and investment analysis. And that was a really fascinating experience because Bridgewater's whole idea was that you could treat the economy like a giant machine and systematically understand how the components of the machine work together and use that to predict the behavior of the economy and use that to predict the performance of financial markets and financial assets. So I did a lot of pretty complex modeling there and really got a taste for the impact of using data to help people make better decisions. And then I left Bridgewater after about 3 years.
Wait. Before you left Bridgewater, you said you majored in philosophy?
Majored in philosophy with a concentration in psychology.
So what is a philosopher doing crunching data in a large financial institution? Like, were you training math or something? Or I don't understand that.
I took a statistics 101 class in college, but then I had to learn a lot on the job. Before I started an internship at Bridgewater, I bought a finance textbook and read the entire glossary to make sure that I knew all the basic terms. But to Bridgewater's credit, they did a great job of not selecting too much for experience, and instead selecting for people who had kind of the general motivation and other traits they were looking for. And then they had a pretty intensive education program for the first year that people were there, training them to be what they called investment associates. So sort of through a combination of that program and self-education, I was able to learn enough to be useful in the team.
That's amazing, George, because it leads to confirming what I already knew, right? I've been an entrepreneur for over 20 years, and I hire for attitude, not for technical knowledge necessarily. So I much rather get somebody that is willing to learn and that is able to learn than an expert with a bad attitude, if that makes sense, right? And you're a classic example of that, right? Like, you knew nothing about finance. You knew nothing about putting them together. And look at you now. You're a CTO. That's amazing, right? So what happened after that? So I guess you got into computer science by experience, because I guess the job demanded it with all the modeling you were doing. What happened after that?
So after 3 years, I kind of decided that finance and trying to predict the price of oil tomorrow was not the thing that excited me most in the world. And what excited me a lot more was this idea of using data to make better decisions and helping people find and learn from data. So I actually left to start my own startup, went through a few different iterations. The original vision was to be a search engine for financial data. I ended up pivoting that into a site that helps people connect with musical culture called linernotes.com. It was helping people sort of it was the kind of dawn of Spotify and the beginning of the sort of streaming MP3 era. And I felt that people could easily find musical tracks, but had gotten pretty disconnected from who made the music, how that music fit into the broader cultural background. And so made a site to aggregate all that information and make it easily browsable and searchable. Unfortunately, when I released that, Google released a very similar feature built directly into the Google search engine. And that was the first time that I learned the challenges of competing directly with Google. So I pivoted that into a site that, an app that recommended electronic music that was both personalized to people's individual tastes, but also to their activity and energy level. So throughout that process, that's when I really learned to program. I spent a little bit of time looking for programmers to work on the site with me, but then just eventually decided it was easier to pick up a Python textbook and start learning Django and build the site myself. And so that's what I did over the course of a few years. Unfortunately, that app didn't work out. Distributing consumer apps is very hard, and music licensing rights are very challenging to acquire. So after that, I sort of used the Python and data analysis skills that I developed, did a little bit of contracting for about a year and a half, and then got a full-time job at Upwave, starting as an individual contributor data engineer. Actually just hit my 9-year anniversary on Monday. So I started July 7th, 2016.
You realize how I consider that every challenge in life, in your professional life, can bring you to the person you're supposed to become, right? You didn't even know how to code, and because of your idea of your startup, you roll up your sleeves and picked up Python and Django, and you created your own website, and you knew how to do backends and how to do middle tiers, and that opened up the door of a beautiful career that you probably didn't imagine when you graduated university you were going to have, right?
Yeah, I like to think back on my life and think that it's sort of, if at any point you had asked me, what are you going to be doing in 5 years? I would have been pretty much completely wrong, no matter what time in my life you asked me that.
And it's funny that you mentioned that. And I did promise you I was going to go very light on my faith, but that goes back to faith, right? You don't know what's going to happen in the future before you know you're filling up the shoes that you were supposed to have. And by the way that you look, it looks like you're completely happy and satisfied in the role that you're fulfilling. Because one thing is to get into a position or into a career that you didn't expect by force, and you have to do it to make ends meet, which is 90% of the people. And another thing is finding your path and fulfilling it and being happy about it, which is you, right?
Yeah, I've been very lucky. I love the job that I have today. I feel like it really plays to my strengths. It's very interesting. Feel like I get to have a big impact. I get to work with people I really like on a fascinating problem. I'm very lucky that I've managed to find my way to where I am.
So when was the first time that you were qualified or people saw you as a leader?
So as I mentioned, I started as an individual contributor data engineer, and one of the first problems that I worked on was the causal inference challenge that goes into the survey measurement that we do. I mentioned a moment ago that to get incremental impacts of advertising, you have to remove the targeting pre-effects. And the reason for that is because a lot of times advertising is targeted at people who already have a positive or negative opinion of a brand. So with digital advertising, you might target ads to people who've already visited a Mercedes website. And then if you just look at consideration among the people who saw the ad and compare it to people who did not see the ad, you might see a super high apparent increase in consideration. But what's actually happening is just that you're surveying people who already were considering a Mercedes, and that's why they went to the website in the first place. And so to get real accurate estimation, to make real well-grounded financial decisions about advertising, you have to correct for that pre-existing targeting effect. And it turns out there's an entire subdiscipline of statistics called causal inference that's entirely about doing those corrections and making sure that you're measuring what the ads actually caused. So when we first got into this field, we realized, hey, we need a causal inference engine. That's not straightforward to do. So I bought a few textbooks about causal inference. That's a little bit of a habit for me to buy textbooks when I don't know how to do something. and built the first version of our engine, but operating it was fairly manual and laborious at the time. So we needed to hire some data analysts and a real data scientist to help turn that into a production-worthy process. But because I had built the first version and I understood the business and the systems, even though I wasn't officially the manager of the people we hired, they just sort of naturally looked to me for leadership because I was the one who knew what we needed to do and how the systems worked. And so we just sort of naturally made me, I guess my first leadership title was lead data engineer. And so I was leading our data team of the data scientists, the analysts. We eventually hired some other data engineers to help out on that project. And that became a pretty tight-knit, cohesive team. We sort of succeeded in turning those initial Jupyter notebooks that I had created into a full, scalable, automated cloud pipeline that runs in AWS.
That's beautiful. So one thing is to manage yourself, and is that you pick up books and you start writing code and beautiful things happen. But because you're in full control of your own self, right? And your own actions, which that alone is hard. That's hard enough. Again, look at 90% of the people, they end up doing what they don't want to do, or they don't do what they want to do, right? I was working on my backyard. Now it's summertime here in Canada, and I wanted to put a sprinkler system in place. I'm like, I can pretty much figure that out, how to do it myself. So paying $10,000 for somebody to do it. Not that I have the money, but I wanted to learn how to do it. And the project started great. I learned how to do it. I went through, Google and all that stuff, all the research. If you're a computer scientist, you need to know how to be a good researcher. I bought all the tools. Everything looked great. I did the design. I laid down all the pipes and all the sprinklers in place above the ground, and I tested it. But that was my first beta test, and it worked perfect. Now it was time to do the trenches and actually put it in. It took me 2 weeks to do that. Why? Because I didn't want to do it. I mean, I wanted to do it, but I didn't have enough discipline to say, I got to get this done as soon as possible. So I finally got it done yesterday, but it took me 3 weeks to take the decision to work for 2 hours to get it done.
There's actually
and so that's hard enough. My question is, how did you encounter motivating people to work on a project that everybody needs to pitch in to get it done? Like, was that hard for you, or how do you figure that out?
Quick side note, there's actually a term from ancient Greek philosophy, akrasia, which means knowing what you're supposed to do and not doing it. So it's ever since the last 5,000 years, ancient Greeks have been facing that same problem of knowing that they need to dig the sprinkler trenches and not doing it. But to answer your direct question about how to motivate people, I think it really comes down to understanding what matters and what's relevant for each individual person. And that's always been kind of a core component of my management philosophy, is that there's not any one size fits all solution. It's really about treating people as people, getting to know them individually and getting to know what they care about. And different people care about different things, and the same people care about different things at different times or different stages in their career. So, with that data team that I mentioned, the first few people I hired were fairly early in their careers. And so they were really just looking for an opportunity to get their hands dirty and prove themselves and build something interesting and impactful to the company. Later on, we hired some data engineers who are a lot more experienced, some people who have a lot of experience in the Python open source world. And for them, they were a lot more motivated by just the challenge of building something scalable and really pushing Python to the limits of what it was able to do at the time. But by providing kind of a really clear mission to the team about this is what we need to do, this is why it's important, and then translating that individually to each individual team member, was able to create a lot of cohesion and motivation on that particular team.
You know what? I think one of the things that help, at least in IT, because this is this is technology podcast, but one of the things that help in IT, at least to my experience and yours, is that if the leader knows what he's talking about, if the leader has done what he's asking people to do, you have instant respect from your followers, right? This is what happened to me. That's why I grew so fast in the corporate world when I was in IT working for other people. is that, I came from an engineering background. I came from an architecture background. I knew how to build the stuff that I was asking them to build. And when things were progressing and computer languages were growing, I will make sure that I will actually keep up to speed my technology skills. Not because I needed it anymore, because I had a ton of people working for me, but it's because I wanted to keep the understanding and I wanted to keep the respect. And I love the computer languages anyway. So I love the science. So I always took time to stay in touch with technology, despite that I was 100% a business leader already. So I think that's what happened to you too. People look up to you. So that creates an instant trust factor in the team, isn't it?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. There's an old saying that cavalry officers need to ride horses. And it's very true. You don't have to be the best at the thing that you do. Ideally, you hire people on the team who are even better than you at the core competencies, but people can tell at the end of the day if you know what you're talking about, and being able to really understand what your team is doing, talk to them as concretely as you need to get to resolution on things really does both build respect and just create clarity and create progress. So yeah, staying current is so important.
Now, that I have after interviewing so many people in the field, there is exceptions to the rule. For example, when you go to a big enough enterprise, your CIO could perfectly be somebody that is not even in technology, that is leading that role, because they are true business leaders that know the objective and they know that they need to provide ROI, right? So they may know very little about the tech stack, but they are great at influencing people and leading people on what do they need to do. But I'm talking about 1,000 people IT departments, right? 2,000 people IT departments. I see it specifically in banking. Like I've talked to CIOs from multinational banks, and this is what I've seen, right? Like people that, they can become the CIO, and then they could become the chief operations officer, or eventually they could become the CEO, right? But if you go below that level, and in smaller teams, the more technical the leader is, as long as you become a business leader too. Because that's another thing, right? Like I try to promote highly technology-oriented people in my team, and all I did was destroy their life because they were not leaders. They were happy developing code, doing architecture work. They were happy doing the technical stuff that they were paid to do. And as soon as I put them in a leadership role, they couldn't handle the team, and they, got frustrated, and they actually destroyed the team. Right?
Yeah, definitely. Putting people in roles that both play to their strengths and that they're going to be happy in based on what they actually care about is so key. Upwave has, as many Silicon Valley companies do at this point, a dual track leadership promotion path where people can be promoted to basically the highest levels as individual contributors, because we have people on our team who are brilliant technologists, but technology is what they love. People management and advertising, technology, business mechanics are not their passion. And that's fine, because we're able to have both sort of a leadership tier that is focused on the business and the product and the organization, and also have people who are really staying super close to the code. And by having mutual trust and working together, that cooperation has worked very well for us.
It's beautiful. George, what do you think of AI and what's coming up over the years ahead?
I am very excited about AI. I think as hyped as it has been recently, I think it is arguably underhyped, which is, I'm usually not easily pulled along on trends and can be a little bit more skeptical about a lot of these things, but I think there's really incredible transformative potential. And even if AI stops progressing today and the models never get any better than they are today, I still think there's transformative potential that's going to massively overhaul a lot of how work happens in almost every organization. And, it can feel a little bit like AI has come out of nowhere in the last couple of years, but as you're sure it's been a very long journey getting here. So kind of back to that 10-year overnight success story. This is, I guess, a 50-year overnight success story. I've been working on things that I would consider AI in some fashion ever since 2008 when I started at Bridgewater. You could argue that Bridgewater is an AI model for modeling the economy and predicting things, but just sort of all these different forms of taking data, taking observations about the world, combining it with computation to make real world decisions or support real world work, has a lot of history and a lot of power behind it. But what's really cool about generative AI is that it's sort of bringing together all those threads and supercharging them even more by making more of the world fundamentally computable. All the previous AI tools we had were very effective on structured data, but a very large percent of the world's data is not structured. It's text, it's conversations like this one, it's human interactions and things like that, that before was very hard to get a computer to operate on in a scalable way. But now just being able to translate a podcast recording into an object that you can feed into a computer and write a program about, it just opens up the span of what you can apply programming to so much more broadly that it's kind of incredible. And, you're just these relatively new agentic coding tools like Claude Code are just a total breakthrough, I think. I've been playing with Claude Code over the last few months, and it has really transformed my personal workflow because, as CTO, who's responsible not just for engineering, but also for product and data science and operations, it's been a long time since I've had sustained blocks of time when I can sit down and just write code in our systems. And, that means that keeping up to date and keeping my memory fresh about the exact details of the APIs of Spring Boot or whichever framework we use has been hard. But with Claude Code, I can pull up a Claude Code window and express my intent and have it read the code base and have it learn all our regular coding standards and actually make changes that make sense and are useful and constructive, or sort of actually stand up new projects or prototypes of ideas that I've had for a long time in a way that would have taken me 10 times as long before. And, not only would it have taken more time, it would have just never happened because I would have never had that large block of time. So, it still requires understanding of what's happening under the hood and of how the technology works to be able to use effectively. But just that amount of empowerment that even I personally have gotten from these tools, and the empowerment that Upwave as a company has gotten. We've released generative AI features that have been super impactful to our customers. One of my product managers told me just before this meeting that the first production AI feature that we shipped about a year ago has seen over 100% growth in usage over the last year among our customer base. It's just, you can make things that are just so useful and so powerful, that were basically impossible to make before. And I think there's just so many domains that have not yet even really started to scratch the surface of how these tools can be used to make them more effective and more productive. And that's assuming AI doesn't get any better. If it does continue to get better and more automated and more autonomous and starts being able to do larger fractions of human labor, it's not only that it will relieve people of needing to do that labor, but also it will make things that would have never been economically feasible to do before happen. Things where you would have had to hire 100 software engineers to build something, and so you never did, suddenly become possible. And just the amount of software that we'll be able to introduce into the world is going to grow in a remarkable and powerful fashion.
Amazing. And this stems that you're saying is crazy because, I wrote a book back in 2023 called AI or Die. And it was a book for my clients. So it was a business book. It wasn't a technology book. And this is what I predicted, right? If you don't apply AI to your business, eventually you're going to go bankrupt because your competition will actually use it. And I had the argument that eventually AI will even replace developers. And since I wrote that book to now, my own developers in my business, probably 35%, 40% of their code is done by AI already. And it's just getting better, right? So for us, what it means is exactly what you said. We don't need to hire more developers. The ones that we have to do 10 times more, 20 times more, right? Because of the tools that is available with AI. Incredible, right?
It's incredible. Just the leverage we get changes so much, but I think there's just so much useful software that has not been built yet, and that never would have gotten built otherwise. I'm not personally worried about developers' jobs or not being useful, because there's just so much left to be done. So many ways the world and our daily experience can be improved through better software. I mean, think of every time in your life when you interact with a piece of software that's not good, a banking website that doesn't log you in, or an app that doesn't have a piece of functionality that you want. Some product manager made a decision at some point that it wasn't worth the money to hire developers to fix that problem. But if all the developers can do 10 times as much, then suddenly making software consistently good in all of your interactions becomes economically feasible. And that's just super cool.
And that's why I tell my people, what you need to do is not be afraid. You need to learn and use the technologies that are coming up and become an expert in them, so that you're more effective. And the more effective you are, the more valuable you are to society, the more you're going to progress in life. It's just a spiritual law, actually, right? If you look at the world, the people that get the most value are the people that give the most value. I'm talking about the free market world, right? Where we allow all the enterprises to compete with each other for the marketplace. That's what it is, right? When you give the more value, you get the more value. Look at Airbnb. Look at the monster that it became. Why? Well, I don't think I have used a hotel for at least 5 years, because it's a lot easier to go to somebody else's house and be there for a couple of days with a full kitchen and everything, right? So they opened up the world in value, so now they got the value back. It's inevitable, right? So this is what we can do with AI nowadays, add way more value. I was interviewing a CTO for a company that they are using AI to double check cancer analysis in cancer patients. And they're finding about 3 to 4% people that had cancer that they were not diagnosed because of human error. 4%.
That's a lot.
Were like unchecked, that could die, right? And this is all thanks to AI, right?
Yeah, it's remarkable. There's so many things that can be better. Yeah, but the medical system has a lot of virtues, but it has a lot of problems too. And there's so many places where just making it easier and cheaper to do the right thing and to be careful and to apply real standard of care in all places is going to make so many people's lives better.
For sure. George, what happens when your startup goes exponential and everything that you hope and dream for happens? What's going to happen to you after that?
Well, I'm going to keep building fun and interesting and hopefully valuable things. I enjoy building. It makes me happy. So, whether or not I have to build things, I'm gonna keep doing it, and hopefully surrounded by people who I love working with. And hopefully still at Upwave. Advertising is a very, very big industry, and there's just so much money still wasted. There's so much work left to be done to make sure that every dollar spent is well spent. We've come a very long way. We've had a lot of success, but there's still a lot of work left to do.
That's a great answer, because a lot of people that don't like what they do, they wish they win the lottery and they have all these millions so they can sip margaritas for the rest of their life, without realizing that after a couple of months that gets boring too, right? Yeah. But when you're passionate about what you're doing, if you get a lot of financial wealth, you're just gonna keep doing what you love doing even more, right? Which is fascinating.
Bridgewater was founded by an entrepreneur named Ray Dalio, who published a book about his principles. And one of the things he says is that happiness comes from meaningful relationships and meaningful work. And I think that was very wise. And he, even though he was a billionaire, kept waking up every day and thinking about how financial markets worked because he loved it. And he loved the people he worked with. And even though he absolutely didn't need to work, he just kept going every day, just out of passion for what he did. And seemed very happy doing it. And that's what I aspire to do, to have meaningful work and meaningful relationships for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm. And I think he's still going at it, right? He's still the CEO of his company.
I think he's no longer the CEO of Bridgewater, but he's still very, very active in public and almost certainly still trading in some form.
Yeah, thanks to him, I know how the economy works and how the quantitative easing works and what's money. It's amazing all the stuff that he puts together, right?
Yeah, I learned quite a lot about business and economics from my time at Bridgewater.
George, thank you so much for your time. Half an hour has gone by. I want to respect your time. I'll ask you one last question before we finish the podcast. If you have access to a billboard in front of the busiest highway on earth, what would you write on it?
It's probably not the ideal answer, but I'm still going to give it because we measure brand advertising. So I'm going to put upwave.com, bringing science to the top of the funnel on that billboard, because so many ad impressions and people driving down the highway, so many hearts and minds you can win. So many people are going to remember upwave.com from seeing the billboard. I can't resist.
That's wonderful. I can tell that you are passionate about what you do, and thank God for that. So, George, thank you so much. People like to follow you. Are you on LinkedIn?
I am on LinkedIn. George
Excellent.
London, Upwave.
Thank you for your time. Please keep doing this. What you're doing, help this world become better, and keep being the great leader that you are. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Leaders in Tech podcast. Check in next week to keep learning how to use technology and leadership to change the game. See you next time.